All right, let me get that fixed. Okay. All right, welcome everyone to Hackschool session 4. This is props and layout. I apologize for the unsettling music, but there is a theme for this workshop, and also it is Halloween coming up, so we're getting in like the spooky vibes. All right, so let's just get started. So this week on Hackschool, session 4, but it is week 5 covering props and layout. So last week we covered an intro to React. And yeah, we're going to be doing some cool stuff with it today. All right, link to the slides. Here it is. I'll give you a second to copy it down. And also, as always, the README is linked at the bottom left. So at any time you're like, oh, like I've fallen behind, I need to catch up. But you can always go to the README, and then the README also has the slide links at the top of it. So do not fret. That is always there for you as a resource. All right, so I'll give you like a little bit longer to copy it down. Welcome, welcome. We just started, so. All right, yes. Okay, I will move on for now. All right, so today's membership portal attendance code is Frontman. So as always, if you would like to enter in the events you go to for ACM, you can get points and then you can win cool prizes. We also have a feedback form, so we really do value your feedback. A lot of the stuff you guys write, we do actually go over every week. We sort of discuss it and we implement some changes. So thank you for those who have been filling it out. Also, if you need an incentive, I guess there's a raffle. I don't really know what's in the raffle, but it sounds cool. So there's that. And last announcement, so ACM internship apps are open. So if you are interested in joining our committee as an officer in the future, I would sign up for this program. Actually, all of the Hack officers once started as interns. So I started as an intern my freshman year. I didn't know anything at all. I was kind of like, wow, what is that HTML tag? Yeah, this pointy thing. And somehow they let me in, and now I'm here teaching you guys. So really, the bar is really low, and we really highly encourage all of you to apply. Yeah, so the deadline for that is this Friday, October 29th, 11:59 p.m. And you can apply to any ACM committee through this. You'll get to mark like your top choices of the committees you want to join. And then if you get it, you'll get to join us and join our lovely family. So yes, definitely check that out. All right, so today, as always, make sure you have a text editor and a browser. Today, I'm going to be using VS Code. Thank you, Eugene. So I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code. So the link to that is on the left. And then Chrome will be my browser of choice, but you can use anything you want as long as you are comfortable with it, that works. All right, and then note today on a code along, as always, this time we're going to tell you when to code along. There will be parts where you'll get to code this on your own and catch up. But for the presentation part, just feel free to watch it. If you want to take notes, that's your style, feel free to do that as well. But try not to code along because you will have the opportunity to do that. And as always, all of the information on these slides and explanations can be found at the README. So if you fall behind or you just kind of want to like see it on the side, the README is there for you. All right, so let us begin. So everyone, welcome to Squid Game. Yeah, so I don't know if you guys have seen it on Netflix. I did really enjoyed it a lot. And I guess all of my workshops tend to be around things I'm obsessed with. So welcome to Squid Game. This is the frontman speaking. I'm your frontman. My name is Jody. I'm a 4th year computer science major. I've been in Hack since freshman year, and I really like it here. But yes, today I'm your frontman. Maybe not as scary as that guy, but, or maybe I am. I don't really know. All right, so if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand and a mentor will come and help you. So we have mentors right now. They're at the back of the room, but if you raise your hand, son, we'll see it. And they can answer any questions. And we promise we're friendly. If you've seen the show, maybe you're scared of these guys, but we're friendly. So don't feel like scared to ask for help. Okay, so today's games. or actually today's content is going to be split into 3 different games. And when I mean games, I really just mean sections, but I'm keeping with the theme here. So the first one is arrays. That'll be taught by me. The second is props, and the third is layout. Let's see. So all of these are 3 separate concepts. We kind of have a very information-packed workshop for you guys today. So our recommendation is try to get at least a high level understanding of some, if not all of these. If you get all of them, that's excellent. You're great. If you get 2 out of these 3 done by the end, like that's also wonderful. If you only get 1 out of 3, that's also okay. And if you at the end, you're like, oh my God, I don't understand any of these, that's also okay too. We know it takes some time for sometimes to wrap your head around information and just let it sink in. So that's okay. Our slides are here as a resource, and so is our readme. So yeah. We are going to begin with the first game. It's not red light, green light, so you guys are good. And this is also a spoiler-free zone. So if you're looking at me and you're like, I don't get any of your jokes, this workshop's going to be lame. I apologize, but this is a Squid Game theme workshop. But for those of you who have seen it, no spoilers. For those who haven't seen it, and yes. All right, so let us begin with arrays. So who here has like heard of arrays before or like somewhat used it? Okay, cool, most people. All right, so if you haven't heard of this before, that's totally okay. If you have, just think of this as like a nice review, and we'll actually get into a little more advanced JavaScript stuff with it, so you can like learn something new from there. Or if anything, just think of it as a syntax refresher as well. All right, so let's begin. So recall that in JavaScript, we can sort of declare variables like this. So we have like game equals red light, green light, player equals Gihun. So suppose we're making a JavaScript program about Squid Game. And we're like, okay, the first thing we got to do is define some variables with some data that's, relevant to the show. So, all right, game, red light, green light, player, Gihun. Cool. And then we're like, okay, well, let's make this more comprehensive. There's actually 6 games. So I wrote 3 here just for the example. So we got red light, green light, Dalgona challenge, tug of war. And then you're like, okay, I'm tired of writing the 6 games. I'm only going to stop at 3, but let's start on the players. We got Gihun, Saebyuk, and Ali. These are like my favorite characters. And you're like, awesome, this is going really great. Like I got this whole numbering system going on, like game 1, game 2, game 3, player 1, player 2, player 3. And you're like, this is great. But then you realize not only there's 6 games, but there's 456 players. So you're going to have to like write this like 456 more times. And you're kind of sitting there, you're like, oh, I have made a mistake. Like, this is not what I want to do. And so you're sitting there and you're asking yourself like, well, what if we could just store multiple values in a single variable? Like why all this let player 1, let player 2, let player 3, and so on? What if we could just do it in some sort of fancy list? And there actually is a solution for that in JavaScript. We call this arrays. So you might have heard this in another language called a list before. Same thing. In JavaScript, we just call it arrays. So we're going to be very happy right now. We're not going to be writing all these lines of like single variable declarations and calling it like game 1, game 2, game 3. We'll be using arrays instead. So it looks something like this. These are just some examples so you can get an idea of what it looks like and what we can do with it. And then I'll dive into the syntax. So we'll have, for example, a players array, and that's an array of strings. So we have like the names of all 3 characters. We can also have, let's say, numbers. So the numbers of each player, like Gihun is 456, Saebyuk 67, Ali 199. Yeah, so we have a list of numbers going on here. We can even do like Boolean. So are they alive? True, true, true. I said no spoiler, so true, true, true. All right, and then let winners empty our array. We can have an empty list. We can have no items in this at all. And finally, we can even do like any type we want. They don't even have to be same within the same array. So we got yikes, 420. I'm sorry, I'm making that kind of joke. And then like an object here. So variable types in the array. So let's actually just break down sort of what the syntax is. So we actually start arrays with a regular variable declaration. This is nothing new to us. So let the name of the variable, in our case players, equals. And then we're going to surround the list of values we want with square brackets. In other languages, you might see something like a curly bracket. In JavaScript, it's a square bracket. And then we're going to separate each of the values we put inside with a comma, right? So looks something like this, kind of similar to what you would do in like English. If you're separating a list of things, you write commas. Yeah, this is what the syntax looks like. And just as a reminder, the elements can be of any type. So although I'm using a lot of strings here, you could put numbers, objects, doesn't really matter. All right, so another really important concept about arrays is indexing. So what is indexing? Indexing is like numbering. So we can number each item in the array and we can access them that way. So in English, when we count, we usually count from 1. You're like, okay, 1, 2, 3, like 1, 2, 3. But in programming, or at least in JavaScript, we start at 0. Don't ask me why. I'm pretty sure there's a reason, but I didn't really pay attention in CS32, so I kind of forgot. All right, so we call these numbers the indexes. So you'll hear me saying like index a lot. That's just very common terminology when we talk about arrays. So if you hear indexing, just thinking, oh, she's numbering them, and we're starting at 0. All right, so we see Gihun is actually the 0th index. Sebyok is the first index, and Ali is the second index, right? So it's like 1 less than how we'd normally count it, but that's just how indexing works. All right, and through these indexes, we can actually access each individual array element. All right, so the syntax looks something like this. I'll go into an example in the next slide, but all we do is we use the array name, square brackets, and then the index. And as a reminder, the index is just a number, and we're gonna replace index with that number, and that's how we can pick out each individual value. All right, so here's an example of that. Let's just say I want to print out a few of these players from my array of players. The way I access it is through players, square bracket, and then the index. So 0 is Gihun. We can see 0 is Gihun. If we say players 2, we go 0, 1, 2, and we get Ali. So this will print out Ali. And then if we go 0, 1, 2, 3, we can see that there's nothing here. And in certain languages, this might actually crash your program, and it'll throw a big error message at you, and you're going to go, oh no, how awful. But in JavaScript, this is not going to crash your program. This is just going to result in what we call undefined. Undefined is just a JavaScript's way of saying like, hey, you don't actually have a value here. Like there's nothing here. It's not 0, it's not 1, it's not a string, there's nothing here. So that's just their way of saying there's no value here. All right, so if you try to access any index that is out of the array, like 3 or 5, something higher, as we see there's nothing here, we'll get an undefined. Okay, any questions on that so far? And I'm kind of blowing through this pretty fast. All right, moving on. So, okay, arrays of objects. So a little motivation into what I mean by arrays of objects. Let's say we're getting deep into sort of this making our program about Squid Game thing, and we're like, okay, well, I just learned about the magic of arrays. I can put multiple values in like one variable, and maybe I'll just have a few arrays that sort of each correspond to each other. For example, in players, the 0th index has Gihun, and the 0th index of player number is his number, and then his player status if he's alive. And then the first one, Sebyok, her number 67, that matches the 1 index here. True, Ali, second index here is 199. And this is also a little cumbersome. So what we can actually do instead is we can put an array of objects. So as we can see here, rather than having like 3 arrays and I just access the same index to get that character's information, I could just put that in an object. So as you can see here, the 0th index just returns an object, same with the first one and the second. So if I did something like this, like we can just think real quick, like what with this output. So just think about it in your head. If I have player's info of 1 dot number, just think about this real quick. All right, so hopefully you're sort of looking at it, and we can actually just walk through this right now. Player's info of 1. So if we count in this player info's array, 0th index is this first one, first index is the second one. All right, so we get back an object. And then just like any other JavaScript object, to access one of the fields, we just do dots and then that field name, so number. And this will print out 67. All right, so one more time, 0, 1 for player's info. And then we go dot number after we access that object number value, and that's 67. Yeah, so any questions here? All right, so you might be wondering like, okay, well, why did you just show me this oddly specific example of throwing objects into an array? This is something you'll commonly see in React projects, is you'll be storing data that's relevant to a certain component within an object, and all those objects will just be an array. So this is something that you'll just very commonly see. I just want to make sure you guys have at least seen it, just so you know it exists. If it doesn't really, if this is kind of confusing you, don't worry, just know that you can store values in an array. That's sort of the main idea here. All right, some other useful operations in JavaScript arrays. This is more of like a reference slide, so I'm not really going to go through it. If you're like, no, I really want to go through it, I'll just say that the first two are probably the ones you'll see the most. So if you take the array name dot length, it'll return the number of elements in the array. So that's like how long it is. And if you do the array name dot push, and then you put in some sort of value in the parameter, like a number or an object, it'll add that item to the end of the array. So these are the most common ones you'll use. There's these other ones here. You'll sometimes see them used, but less often than these first two. So this is just sort of a reference slide. You don't need to know it too much right now. All right, so now that we have arrays, we can also do something called looping through these arrays. So rather than just looking at one big long list of values, sometimes we want to go through each one and like do something to each element. So that's what looping through arrays is. And it looks something like this. Let array name, like these dot 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 just means that there's stuff in it. I'm just too lazy to write like 3 characters apparently. There's stuff in there. And then for let element of array name, curly bracket, and then some code. So let's break this down real quick. All right, so when we say for let element, you can think of this as sort of a variable declaration. So as we're looping through the array, this variable name, which can be named anything, doesn't have to be element, will be the name of the variable that we use to access that current item we're on. So as we go through each array item, as we're looping through it, we'll access that current item with this variable. All right. And then we have to specify the actual array that we're going through one by one. Because we could have many variables defined, or we could have many arrays defined in our code, but we want to go through this specific one. So we say of array name right here. And then inside the curly braces, we have something called the loop body. So this is just code. It can be any number of lines. Right now we just have one. And this code executes on each array element. And remember I said we access that element through the name right here. So this will just perform this code on each item in order from the first item in our array to the last one. So it just goes left to right. It doesn't jump around. It doesn't go backwards, just left to right. All right, so that is our loop body. Any questions on looping through arrays? Cool. All right, so here's just another example of that. Before was just the general syntax, but now I actually have player names in here. And in this, all we're going to do is for each element, which we'll call player. So on the first loop, we'll get Gihun, and we're going to print Gihun. On the second iteration, we'll get to Sebyuk, and then we'll print Sebyuk, and Ali, print Ali. So all this does is for each item, it's going to run this code and print out their names. So nothing too fancy here. This is just a very simple example, right? Okay. All right, so just some quick practice. Even if you're comfortable with arrays already, or this is new, it's nice to get practice and sort of get a feel for how these work. So what I'm going to do is open DevTools. So go to any tab and right click and click inspect. And then you're going to open the console tab. So that looks something like, let me get rid of this. You right click, click inspect. And then you go to up here, like at the top, you're going to see these tabs. If you click console, you're going to get a JavaScript console that you can use. And then you can actually here practice defining some arrays. So I have a few exercises right here. The first one is define an array called family, and this is going to contain the names of all the people in your family. If you don't have anyone that you would like to call your family, maybe use your professor names. If you don't know those, just put some names that you might know. And let's practice. So everyone pull up your consoles right now and start getting those set up. Try print out the first person's name in this family array using console log and indexing we just talked about. And then also do the same thing, but print out the last person's name. And then after that, create a new array called foods. This is just going to contain any foods you like. And then using a for loop, print out the phrase, I want to eat, and then the food name of that array element. So you're going to do that for each one. So this is just some practice. Let's do this for about 5-ish minutes, and then we have to move on. Yes. So does anyone want me to go to how to, or does anyone want me to go through how to open DevTools again? Okay, so let us begin some short practice. Yeah. Okay, 4, 7, 20. So this is just to get you familiar with the syntax, and you can just have a little bit of practice, mess around, see how it works. Yeah. And if you're really confused and you have questions, as always, just raise your hand. Someone will come by and help you out. Yeah, sure. Yeah. Just checking the time. Okay, give me a thumbs up if you have finished number 1. Cool. And then keep your thumbs up if you finish number 2. Cool. All right, I'll give it about a little less than a minute, and then we'll move on. It's okay. All right, let us move on for the sake of time. If you have any questions about this, just feel free to ask us afterwards, but we are going to move on. So let's see. All right, imagine this is like a very common thing you'll see in JavaScript, and this new concept that I'm about to teach is a little more advanced. So if you're still trying to wrap your head around arrays and for loops, just sit and relax and watch this. Just know it exists, but it's not super necessary. If you're very comfortable with arrays already, feel free to watch this. This will actually be something new for you. All right, so imagine you're given a task and they're like, all right, create a new array from an old array. And here are the conditions. Let's say I give you an array of numbers. Let's say something like this, old array 1, 2, 3. And your task is to make a new array. And each item will be every item from the old array, but times 5. So the result should look something like this, like 5, 10, 15, 20, which is just what? 1 times 5, 2 times 5, 3 times 5, and then 4 times 5. And you're like, easy peasy, lead code easy. Let us try this. So you're like, awesome. So we have let old array, and you have the array here, and you're going to say, you're going to make an empty array for a new array. You're like, we'll just start adding each of these. All right. So you're like, awesome. We just learned for loops. So we're going to have a for loop here. And for each item in the old array, we're going to create a new item called like new item. So it's just the old one times 5. And then we're going to use that fancy push syntax. So this, like I said, is just it's just an array operation to add a new item to the end. So you're like, cool, we're going to make the new item, push it onto the end of the new array. Awesome. And then when we print it out, 5, 10, 15, 20, easy peasy. But this is like, you're looking at this and you're like, well, I wrote so much code, like just to sort of make a new array from an old array. And you're looking at this and you're like, wow, this is not really an easy way. This is actually just kind of inconvenient. What if there was like a faster way to do something like this? And there actually is in JavaScript. So there is a better way. So look at all this code, say goodbye to it. Let's ignore it for now. We can actually write it something like this. And as you can see, it's like 1, 2, 3, 4 lines of code. If I wasn't like fancy with a new line here and I put all this on this line, it'd be like 2 lines of code. So there is a better way with like neat, shorter syntax, and it's all due to this one function called map. So like I said, if you are still wrapping your head around arrays, just sit and watch. Otherwise, this is some cool new stuff. So what is this map function? Let me just describe what it does before I get into the syntax. So the map function, one, it takes a function. So if you sort of look on this left, this is actually a function. What it's going to do is going to take that function and run that function on each element. So it's going to perform some code, whatever code is in here, on each element of the array. And then it's going to return a new array with all those new updated elements. So very similar to our for loop, but just really short syntax. All right, so here's just that one more time. As a summary, the array.map function calls a function on every item of an array and returns a new array with the results of each of those function calls. All right, so imagine we have an old array. It just has the words like solo, taco, hello. And we write some code and we put it to the map function, and the code just appends the word whoa to the end of each string. So your new array that's going to come out says solo, whoa, taco, whoa, hello, whoa. I apologize for the oh jokes. Not really. All right, so let's just break down this syntax a little bit and look at another example. So what does this do? So we have the original, the name of the old array.map, and then we're going to have this arrow function. So if you were looking at me like, yo, that's not a function. Functions don't look like that. Well, it turns out functions can be written a few different ways in JavaScript. This is one you'll very, very commonly see, and it's called the arrow function because of this little arrow here. So fancy syntax for a function without a name. So notice here, we're not like giving the function any sort of name. It's just a function without a name. It's got this arrow function. All right, and we just call this function on each item. And as we can see here, the parameter to the function, which is just what's in the parentheses here, that'll be the name of the current array item during each iteration. And then we have some code here. And the result of whatever ends up in that new array is just whatever is returned in this block of code here. So it says new array time. I think I meant item. New array item will be the result of this statement. Okay, so why array.map? Let's just do a side-by-side comparison of this for loop and this map function. So we can see that we both have the old array here, all right? And then while we're building the new array, we're going to reference the old array. So in the for loop version, we just do for, I wrote in, that should also be of, my bad, for old array right here. And then in the map version, it's just the old array.map. And then the new item that or the item of the old array for each iteration, and this old one is just let old item. And this new map syntax, it's just the name of the parameter we pass in. And then we have the loop body. So the loop body here is kind of what we discussed before. You create an item, push it into the array. But here, all we have to do is return the new item we want in this curly brackets. Right, so that's sort of a side-by-side comparison of array.map to the for loop. So, oh, and if we print out the array, we can see they're the same. So these do the same thing. It's just one is less code. All right, so why do we use array.map? We could just use a for loop, but as we saw, we have shorter syntax and cleaner code with the map function. And this is something you're very, very commonly seeing in React. So I kind of went a little fast with that, but that's just for the sake of time to get to the other part of our workshop. But yeah, just know that this exists. If it's confusing, like I said, you can technically live without it. You'll just see it a lot in React codes. All right, so we are done with our first game. I don't know how many of you have got tired. So hopefully you learned a little bit from that. If that was a lot, it's okay. We're going to context switch and we're just going to move to an entirely new concept called props. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to hand off this to Alex by moving. All right, go Alex.
Hello. Yeah, so if you just learned about arrays and .map, you still don't understand much of it, just throw it out of the window for now. Right now, we're going to be jumping into React, which is what we learned last week. And we're going to be learning about props in React. So just a little recap of last session, if you were here. Basically, if you remember, we learned how to create a React project using npx create React app, and when we learned how to make components. So if you remember, we could make like a post, and then we could use this to return some sort of thing that looks like HTML, and it's actually JSX. So JSX, if you don't remember, it's just basically HTML, but then we use it inside of a JavaScript file. And the benefits of that is that we can add programming elements inside of the HTML. And this is just JSX, it's just a fancy term. So right now, if we have defined this component here called post, remember that we can use it just like an HTML tag. Yeah, so as part of that, this sort of recap, we're going to be, I guess, for this demo, for this part of the workshop, we're going to be trying to recreate Netflix's episode list. So if you guys are not too familiar, Netflix has this sort of episode list at the bottom here, and you can basically scroll around and browse for which episodes you want to watch, and it just has a description and an image and all of that. Okay. Now, just to reiterate again on following along. So I'll be attempting to create the Netflix episode list for Squid Game, and throughout the workshop, you'll be given opportunities to create an episode list for any TV show that you like. Doesn't have to be Squid Game, can be, and there'll be time allocated for that. Yeah, so let's make Netflix. Let's get started, right? So first things first, before you get started, just to I guess refresher on what we did last week. So first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a folder in my desktop. You can create a folder too in anywhere you want. It just has to be somewhere that's easily accessible, like my desktop. So I'm gonna name it Netflix clone project. Okay. And this is just in my desktop. Okay, so I can easily find it. And yeah, and if we remember what we did last week, all we did was open VS Code. So I'm going to type VS Code, and then you can open a new window here. So I'm going to open a new window. And this just opens a blank project in VS Code. Then I can click open folder. And it prompts me to let me open my any folder that I want. And if you remember my reminder to create a new folder where it's easily accessible, is because you want to be able to find it easily. So in my case, I created my desktop. So I click desktop, and then it should be somewhere, and then it should be called Netflix clone project. So I'm going to click Netflix clone project, and then I'm going to click select folder. And yes, I trust the author of all. Yes, just agree to everything, and everything will be fine. Okay, so we have our blank project. Now, the next step, if you remember from last week, is that we need to get the terminal up and running. So the way to do that is there's a terminal bar up here. So if we click terminal and then new terminal, this gives us a new terminal. Why is this in Windows Subsystem Linux? I don't know. Will it work? Okay, that's okay. And if we remember, the command to create a new React project was npx create React app. And then we can name it whatever we want. In this case, let's call it Netflix clone. Right. Then we press enter, and oh my God. Oh, oops. Create, oh, correct. That is a typo. All right. Thank you. And it should run. Okay. Yeah, so it's installing packages right now. And that's where I hand it off to you guys. So our first game, or this is a checkpoint, I guess, is if you guys want to follow along and create your own episode list, you guys can start and just basically copy what I did. Use npx create React app to create a new React app. And once it's done, you can try to use npm start to run the default starter app. Okay, so I'll give y'all like 5 to 10 minutes for that, while I also wait for my packages to, or my project to be created. And again, if any of you run into any issues, don't hesitate to raise your hand, and a mentor will come over and help you. Yeah, and that's 5 to 10 minutes. I think it's because it's yeah. Oh, I think we should change that. Yeah. Oh, yes. Forgot to mention, but after you run this command, you have to actually cd into the directory. So let's say that you created something called Netflix copy. You have to run cd Netflix copy and then run npm start. Okay, give me a thumbs up if you can see if you've done the game. Yeah, okay, cool. So mine should be loading up soon. I'm just giving it some time. Yeah, so if we have this screen, that's great. We can move on. Okay, moving on. So we said that we'd create the episode list. Let's try to break down or like analyze how we can actually go about doing that. So just by looking at this screen from a high level view, we realize that we can perhaps split all of this whole episode list into its individual episodes, right? If you see here, it seems that these blocks all have the same formatting. They all seem to do the same thing. They all contain text in the same places. It's just that the text or the images is different. So maybe we can group these under a single component. Let's call this component an episode. Okay, so let's try to see how that will work. So in your VS Code, if you see, this is, just to reiterate again, this is on the left here, is your source file. So you want to click into source. And this is just going to be where you'll be working on your React project for the most part. Okay. And I'm going to do a few things first. So first, I'm going to create a new folder called components. The way to do that in VS Code is on the sidebar here in source, I'm going to right click and then I'm going to select new folder and then components. Okay. And I'm going to create another folder. I'm going to call it images. So again, right click on source and then call it images. Okay, that's cool. Okay, so if we remember from last week, the way we create a component is under the components folder, we create a new file called episode list.js. So I'm going to call the file episode list.js. And then I'm going to, if you remember how it worked, we're going to import React from React. Okay, and this is just something you need to put on the top of every one of your React files. That's a convention. So again, going back to the first slide that I showed, the way we create a component was to define a function, and I'm going to call it episode list. Oh, is the file not big enough? Okay, I'm also going to minimize this so we see what's going on. Okay, so that was a little too big. Big enough? Cool. So we want to create a component and we want to call this component episode list. So we create a function by the name of episode list. And then we can return any JSX function, any JSX expression that we want. So in this example, let's have it return an empty div for now. Just a note, there's a reason why I'm starting all of these functions with a capital, and that's because components have to start with a capital, and that's a convention that React enforces. So you'll get an error if you don't start your components with a capital letter. Okay. Now, so we did say that our episode list perhaps can contain a bunch of episodes. So let's define this episode component, right? So we can define another component and call it episode. I can't spell. Okay. And then this episode also returns some JSX. And for now, let's have it return an empty div. And if you forgot, div is just a box. Okay, a box. Just right now, we're returning an empty box. Okay. So right now, we've defined two components. One is an episode component that is just an empty box, and another episode list component that is also an empty box, but it's soon not going to be, because inside of episode list, we're going to have a bunch of episodes. So right now, our episode, we have an episode component here. And inside of episode list, we have a bunch of episodes. Okay. Now, again, throwing your minds back to how we then displayed this on our website, we have to export the component. So in this case, we want to export default episode list. And then this means that the rest of the project knows about episode list and can use it. Okay. So let's, on the side, I'm going to go to app.js. So just to reiterate again, app.js is in source. If we click on app.js, this is where all of our code is being displayed on our website. So if you see this really familiar edit source app.js and save the reload, this corresponds exactly to what you see here on the screen. Why is this computer touch screen? Trigger. Okay, and then yeah, so first things first, I'm going to get rid of everything here from header to header, almost everything. So I'm gonna, okay, get rid of all this backspace. Yeah, satisfying. Okay, now if we save, it should be a white screen now, correct? Because we got rid of everything. And now we want to use our newly created episode list component, right? So remember, when we export something, we have to import. So I'm going to import something. And in this case, we need to use like the path that we learned. So I'm going to import episode list from, and remember that right now we are inside the source folder. app.js is our current file, and we are inside the source folder. So, and we want to get to episode list.js. So we start with a dot, that is our current source folder. And then we want to get to the episode list.js. So we have to go to components. And then we want to go to episode list.js inside of the components folder. And don't forget the semicolon. Let's save. Cool. So we've imported episode list. And all we need to do now is to use episode list. Cool. Now, if we save it and we go back to our website, you'll see that right now this has nothing. And that's valid because we only define an empty box. So an empty box is just nothing. Okay. So just to reiterate again on what we just did, we created two components. One is the episode component. And the episode component right now currently returns nothing. And then we created another component called episode list. And just as its name suggests, it contains a bunch of episodes. And then we just displayed them one by one by one. And then finally, we exported episode list. So, and then we exported this episode list. And then finally in our app.js, we imported this episode list and used it and tried to display it in our main screen. So just to like prove to you that we didn't do any, that we actually did it, if I type here like 1, 2, 3, and I save it, and I go back, this has 1, 2, and 3 down one by one. Okay, so 1, 2, 3 is a far fetched from this thing here. So that's gonna be our next step. Okay, but for now, it's time for checkpoint 2. It's your turn now. So create a components folder and an images folder, just like I just did. And then set up the sort of bare bones episode list.js, like I just showed. And then modify app.js to display your bare bones episode list. So these are the tasks for now. And also another note, if you need me to like scroll back to like my code to see how I did it, or you need a refresher, just feel free to shout out. Okay. Yeah, and again, another 5 to 10 minutes.
So I'm wondering what's the syntax to get the episode list to show up. I'll just type my own name. But yes, so I guess I just put something. Okay.
Go back to the code here. Oh, okay. Well, it's not really doing anything. Oh well. I'll just collapse it. Don't worry about it. It's this one.
So just instead of doing like just pass down. Right. So you can just call it like episode. I just follow.
Okay, give me a thumbs up if you have done it. Cool, cool, cool. Okay, so we can move on now. Yeah, for those who are still like catching up, it's okay. Just take your time. Okay, so we have our episode, but right now it's just 1, 2, 3. So let's try to get it to look something like this, or have, or try to at least. And so we have a episode. Let's try to break it down further. So first, we see that, perhaps we can break this down into 3 boxes or div tags, because there's one box here, there's another box here, and then there's a third box here, because all of these are just containing some sort of content inside of them. And I don't think, and it would be reasonable to separate these into these 3 boxes, okay? And if we separate this even further, if we try to break it down even further, we can see that inside of these boxes, we can see like the individual components that these might be made of. So perhaps this could be an H3 tag, this could be an image tag, and then this could be another H3 tag, and this is a paragraph tag, and this is also another H3 tag. Yeah, so now that we've broken, or we have this sort of analyzed what an episode component could look like, let's get to trying to code it, I guess. Okay, so let's go back. So in our episode component, note that we're returning a big box. Okay, so inside of this box, we remember that we could split it into 3 more boxes. So let's create those boxes, or rather 3 div tags. So 3 div tags. Yeah, like so. Also, another note on like following along. I know I'm like typing all of this and you guys might be worried that like you might not be like keeping up or something. It's totally okay. And we don't, and we'll also give you time as we did like in the checkpoints to code it yourself. So if you think like this is really complicated and you're not really understanding like what I'm typing, it's totally okay. Just stop. Like you don't need to like code along with me. You'll just use the time that we give you to do the demo. So yeah, don't feel pressured to catch up. Okay, well, jumping back, we have 3 boxes here, just like we tried to break down. And well, what's in the first box? So in the first box, we, you know, maybe that we thought that maybe this is an H3 tag. So okay, so if we do an H3 tag, and what is inside of its H3 tag? Well, for now, it contains the number 1, okay? And that's just the number 1. And then in the second box just contains an image, okay? So let's do an image tag. Image is a self-loading tag, so it looks like this. And if we remember how images work in how we can use images, I'm gonna make this on another screen like this, so this looks much better. There's 2 properties for an image, or 2 or more. One of them is source, so what our image source is going to be. So if you remember, we have to actually go and find the image that we want to display. So I'm going to go on Google and I'm going to search Squid Game. And then in images, let's find some sort of image that we can use as our thumbnail. Okay, I'm going to choose this one for our first one. And I'm going to right click and go save image as. Okay, so again, we want to be able to find our project. So I'm going to go to desktop. You'll have to find wherever you saved yours in. And I'm going to scroll all the way to Netflix clone project. And then I'm going to click into, sorry if this is hard to see, but this is Netflix clone. And then this is source and images. So in the images folder that I told you to create like 2 checkpoints ago, or 1 checkpoint ago, we want to save our image into that folder. And just for simplicity's sake, let's name this image squid game -1. Okay, so it's downloaded. If we go back to our VS Code and we go onto the Explorer and we go to images, you'll see that yes, indeed, we have this image here called squidgame1.jpg. Okay, so we want to be able to use that in our current episode list.js file. So the way we do that, if you recall from last week, is to import, and I'm going to call the image squidgame1, and then if this is more path using, path finding, I guess we can call it. So images, it's inside of, our Squid Game image is inside of the images folder, and the images folder is inside of the source folder. But currently our episode list.js is inside of the components folder. Okay, so we want to go back a folder. We want to go get out of the components folder. And if you remember how to do that, it's just ... So right now we're in the components folder. Oh, sorry, we're in the source folder. And once we're in the source folder, we can simply just go to the images folder and get squid-game-1.jpg. It should be called, just to make sure. So yeah, squid-game-1.jpg. And then once we have our image, we can specify it in the source property. So remember the curly brackets, squid game 1. And then, yeah, that's it. So, and we can give it some alt text, which is, let's just say thumbnail of image of episode. Okay. And yeah, let's go back to see to our React app to see what it looks like. Okay, nice. So what is this text on the side? I didn't choose a very good image, just some random text. Okay, that's okay. So right now, obviously, this image is a little big. Shouldn't have said obviously, but this image is a little big. But thankfully, image has a property where we can change the width. So if we change the width, and let's say, I don't know, 100 pixels, and we save and we go back to our screen, great. Our image is now 100 pixels. It's much smaller and much easier for us to read. Okay, so that's the image done with. So this is the second box. So remember, there are three boxes. We've done with the first one, we're done with the second one, and we're done. Now we gotta do the third one. So the third one was a little more complicated, if you remember. It has an H3 tag followed by a P tag, and it also has an H3 tag here. Okay, so for demonstration purposes, I'm not gonna do this like the time here. I'm just gonna focus on these two. So this just had an H3 tag and a P tag. So let's try to do that. So first an H3 tag, okay? And this is the title of the episode. So let's call it red light, green light. That is the title of the first episode. I wonder what it means. Yeah, okay. And then, okay. And after the H3 tag, we can do, I'm gonna minimize explore. There's a P tag, so this is the P tag. And what we're supposed to write now is this long description of the episode name. Now, I don't want to bother with all this, so I'm going to cheat a little, and I'm going to go on Google, and I'm gonna search lorem ipsum. Okay. And I'm going to, and there's this website called lipsum.com. And if you scroll down, there's this like long Latin text. Long text of Latin. I'm gonna copy the first two sentences. And I'm gonna paste it here in our paragraph tag. Okay. So for those who don't know what this is, so this is, as it says here in the description, it's just some dummy text that is often used in like the industry for like, let's say that we are deving something and we're supposed to put some sort of description here, but then we don't have the description right now, or we're too lazy to copy the description. Let's just use some dummy text. And it just became a thing to use this lorem ipsum text to display it. Okay, so that's it. It's just this text. Okay, now another thing to note is that my VS Code has now extended off the page to some really long line, and I don't like that. So what I'm gonna do is, if you would like to do that too, you can go to View on top here and go on View, and if you scroll down, there's an option called Word Wrap. Okay, on Windows, it's also Alt-Z. So if I click that, oh yay, it all goes on to the same. This looks so nice now. Okay, so yeah, that's just a little trick in VS Code. Okay, great. So I'm gonna make this all on the same line. Okay, so if we save the file, and then go back to our React app, we see that yay, right? We have our episode number, which is inside of a box. We have our image, which is inside of another box. And then we have our H3 tag and our P tag, which is also inside of a third box. So right now, this looks kind of like an episode list. If you ignore how ugly it looks. And yeah, so right now, we still have a lot of work to do ahead of us, but for now, let's catch up. It's now your turn for a checkpoint. And if you want to work on your own component, and it's time for you to work on your own episode component, sorry. So I did Squid Game. You can do any TV show you like, but if you could just try to fill out the episode function component, and feel free to copy as much of my code as you like. And at the end, your end result should look somewhat like mine. A note is you don't have to worry about the styling and positioning of the text. Just try to get it to look like this, okay? Yeah, maybe another 5 to 10 minutes for that. Thank you. Yeah, and raise your hand if you need help from the mentors. I'm going to go scroll back to my code, so it's better reference. I'm actually going to zoom out so it's easier to see. Oh God, yeah, I think this is better. Right. It's actually kind of hard to see. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Might have to speed on it.
Your part is more important than mine after.
Mm.
Mine is
I think layout's pretty important too. Yeah, we're not trying to be small, bro. Literally worst websites ever. Air condition? No, it's from your Cacao Talk. Turn it off. Why do you have it on?
It's like linked to a computer. Just mute the notification.
I muted your.
It's-
Oh,
Just ignore that. Okay.
okay. Thumbs up if you have this or have something that looks like this. Okay. It's okay if you haven't. Right now, we're gonna just jump into like a 5-minute break just for like if you need the toilet or if you need a water or you want to stretch. So we'll be back at if I can do math, 8:22. Just if you want the restroom or anything. If you don't, then and or you still want to work on your website, then that's okay too. But you can do some stretches. It's always good for your body. Stand up, do some stretches. How's midterms going? Yeah, it happens. Oh yeah, it might be actually. It is an HDMI, so it is an HDMI, so probably will. Okay, so it's 8:22. Let's get started back again. Okay, so right now we have our website or our episode list looking like this. And we actually got a question from last week. It's like, how do we change the content of the second one? Because right now, obviously, we don't want everything to be just the first episode. And that's actually a very interesting question. Let's say you worked at Netflix and you're in charge of updating the episodes, right? And Squid Game comes out with a new episode and you get your order from your boss, update our website so that it displays episode 4 or something. And how do you do that? Well, if you were not really familiar with React, you might look at this code and be like, oh, I know how to do it. I'm going to call this episode 1. And let's say episode 2 was coming out. I'm going to copy and paste all of this. And I'm going to paste it into here, episode. And I'm going to name this episode 2. And then I'm going to change this to episode 1, episode 2. And maybe this is episode 3 or something. And then inside of episode 2, I'm going to change this to 2. I'm going to change this to Squid Game 2. I'm going to change the title, whatever. Right? That's not very efficient, right? And it means that you end up having to create a component for every single episode. But that sort of defeats the whole purpose because we spend so much work in creating one div, the H3, the div, the image, and it's sort of, we're just copy and pasting that, and it's just the same format. And we're essentially achieving the same thing, but we're copying and pasting it 3 times, which is not what we want. Okay, so I'm gonna get rid of this. So how do we fix this? And that is sort of the motivation that leads us to talk to props. Okay, so what we've done previously technically has all just been recap from last session. You've all should know what we've been doing from last session, but here is some new concepts. This is the new thing that we want to teach today, and that is props. Props stands for properties in React. And what are they? So what is props? Props are a way that we can pass in data from one component to another. And so instead of each component having hard-coded content, and by hard-coded content, I mean in our episode component, we have hard-coded content because in a single episode, we have a one, like this is a hard-coded one here, and this is a hard-coded title, red light, green light, and this is hard-coded content. So instead of having this, we give data to the component as an input. And the component can then use this input to generate a different looking thing. So for example, if we give it different inputs, then it can generate a different looking episode, or it can do different things based on the inputs that you give it. And this allows us to reuse a lot of code. And props is a very important part of React in general. So if there is one thing I would say you have to take away from this workshop, props is it, okay? So, sad to those people who left early, but yeah. Yeah, so to better understand that, let's jump into an analogy. So, and that analogy is functions, okay? So let's say we have to define a function called say hello. Okay, and this function is very simple. It takes in, where is my pointer? It takes in a argument called name, and name is just an object, okay? And we can access the attributes inside of the object with last and first. So obviously name is has, as it says, this is the last name and this is the first name. And since and this function, all it does is say console.log hello, last name, and then first name. The reason why we're doing last name and then first name is because we're Korea boos. Okay, so now that we have this function, we can expect that every time we call it with a different argument, we would get a different output. Okay, so for the first line, if we called say hello with this object, first name and last name, our say hello function would print hello Song Gi-hoon. And similarly, if we called say hello with another object, first name Sebyok and last name Kang, then our function would print hello Kang Sebyok. Okay, so this is the sort of intuition that we want to bring. So in functions, we can sort of change the behavior of the function based on the inputs that we give. So we give it one input and our say hello function does something different. And if we give it another input, it does something different again, okay? So you can do this with JavaScript functions, but if you remember how we actually created a component in React, the way we did it was to create a function, right? Remember how we created a component? We created a function episode. So I guess the main idea is that if functions in JavaScript can take in arguments, they can take in inputs, then why can't React components, since we are using the same function to define it, right? So the way we do this is using something called props, and that is what props is. And I just want to reiterate again on this slide is that props is something you all have already seen, used, and seen in action, okay? And let's take this image tag as an example. So, remember that when we used our thumbnail, we just did image and then we specified a property source and alt. And this is, seems that it does the same thing as what we want, right? We're using the same image tag, but then based on this source property, we can change the image. So we could define another image with another, and we give it another image as the source, such as Squid Game 2, and it would have a different image. So essentially, we're changing the input that we give to this image tag, and the image tag does a different thing, okay? And so we didn't tell you, but source and alt are actually props. We can give it to the tag as an input, and the tag does a different thing based on the input. Okay, and I'm gonna say this again because this is sort of like a really core concept of, you know, just web development in general, but also React. Okay, so how do we, you know, we've seen how we can use proper props for image tag, and image is not something we created ourselves. So how do we use it for something we created ourselves? And so this is on the left is how we might want to use props, right? So in our episode list component, we might want to say, okay, we want to use an episode component and we want to pass in prop1 as the first prop. And we use, same as the image tag, we use the same syntax, prop1 equals 2, and then the value that we want to pass in as the prop1. And then for prop2, let's say this might be the title, and we pass in the value on the other side of the equal sign. And I guess it's important to just say it now that prop1, prop2 can be named anything you want. It doesn't have to be named prop1, prop2. And on the right here, the value that we assign to prop1 and prop2, they can be any JavaScript value. Okay, so now that we pass this data into our component, how does our component actually use this data? And that's on the right here, which is in our function definition of our React component, we do a few special things. Okay, one of the things is that we add props here as an argument. So we add props and we just call it props. You can call it anything again. You can call it like ABC. It's just props. It is just the props or the data that you passed in, and it's passed in as an object. So this is, so here we call it props. And so inside of our JSX code, we can use the value that we've passed in like this. So for example, we have, remember the braces for any JavaScript variable, and then we can do props.prop1 and then props.prop2. And then in this example, props.prop1 is just 1 and props.props2 is just red light, green light. Okay. And that's how we use props. So you can think of props as just whenever we do this funny prop1 equal to 1 or prop1 equal to prop2 equal to some value. Under the hood, React just takes this, it transforms into an object, into a JavaScript object, and it just passes it into our function component whenever we define it. And if we specify a argument here, so we need to specify an argument to be able to access it. Yeah, I talked a lot. Are there any questions about this? No? Okay. So let's apply this to our Netflix app, right? Okay. So if we go back, what do we want to do first, right? In our episode, let's start with step 1. So in each episode, we want to pass in a new, we also want to pass in props, okay? So what do we want to pass in? What is changing? So I guess I should, okay. So in our, I skipped off of Netflix, that's fine. So what is changing? What is changing in our app is the title, the episode number, the image, and the description. So we want to pass in props for all 4 of those because we want them to be different for every single episode. Okay, so let's call our first property episode num. Okay, and because this is the first episode, I'm going to pass in 1 here. Our second property is title. So this is the title of the first episode. I'm going to call it red light, green light. Green light. And then the third property is thumbnail. again, I'm going to pass in squid game 1. And then for the third property, I'm going to pass in description. And description is just this long text. I'm gonna go up here and copy and paste it. This long filler text that we said was just dummy text and it means nothing, okay? So that's episode 1, okay? Now I'm gonna copy and paste all this again to the bottom, yada, yada. And now we should have 3 episodes that look exactly the same, okay? We pass in the same data to all of them, okay? And let's just leave this for now. We can change it later, but for now, let's see how we can use this data that we passed in. So if you recall from the slides, we add a new argument in our function in the definition of our component, and call it props. You can call it anything again, but we like to just call it props because it's exactly what it is. It's props. Okay, and now we need to go around and to change everything that we've hard coded. So this one here should just be, remember the braces, props dot. And if you remember, if I scroll down again, we passed in episode num equal to 1. Okay, so this is the prop and this is the value we passed in for the prop. So we should do episode num here. And this should resolve into 1 for the first episode. And then for now for all of them. Okay, and moving on. This is the image. So we don't want a hard-coded image. Instead, we do props dot, if you remember, thumbnail. And thumbnail corresponds to this prop that we pass in here, thumbnail. Okay. And again, going down, going down, going down. This is also hard-coded. This is the title of our episode. So we need to change it to, remember the braces, props dot title, okay, and props.title corresponds to title down here, okay. And finally, is this long description. I'm going to call this props.description, okay. And again, description corresponds to the prop description that we passed in here. Okay, so let's save our file and see how it looks. Nothing changed, great. And that's because we passed in the same data to all of our current components right now. So let's change that. So I'm going to change this episode number to number 2, and I'm going to change this episode number to number 3. And the title of the second episode is called Hell. And then the title of the episode for number 3 is called The Man with the Umbrella. With the umbrella. Okay. Now I'm going to, and if we save and we switch back, indeed, the number changed, 1, 2, and 3. So, and also the title changed, okay? And if we had more time, we would go to Google and we'd search for another image and we just say, and then we save this image in our images folder. We might call it the episode 2, Squid Game 2. So I'm going to do one just for demonstration purposes. So I'm going to go to Google Images and let's go look at a good image. Let's use this one. And this is episode 2. Let's just say we use it. So we save image as, save it in the same folder. I'm going to call it squidgame2.jpg. And then we can import this, import squid game 2 from // is the same images, and then squid game 2.jpg. Okay. And in our props now, we can pass in, instead of squid game 1, we pass in squid game 2. Okay. And if we save and we go back to our React app, yay, the image changed, right? And if we had more time, I would do this for all of the components, but we don't have, just I'm gonna, before I do that, I'm gonna let you guys get started. So game 4 for this checkpoint, convert all of your episodes components to use props. So just like I did. Again, feel free to use as much of the code I just typed as you like. And after you've done that, then well done. You have successfully incorporated props into your website. Okay. So again, maybe this might be longer. Actually, this should just be another 5 to 10 minutes. So yeah, y'all get started on that. Okay. And in the meantime, I'm going to go on Google and find some images. Oh my God, so freaky. Okay. Yeah. But where do you want to see? Okay. Like this. Yeah, I guess I'll leave it a bit. Yeah, it's just like this. Okay, thumbs up if we have props in our apps now. Okay, cool. So I had an extra section on how we can use array.map to make it even better, our apps even better, but that's like sort of extra. It's not really, it's just basically making our code more easier to maintain or like, and stuff like that. So it's not like, doesn't contribute to what the core of what we're teaching today. So I'm gonna skip over it. A note about that though, is if you want to look over like array.map or just anything that we've covered in this workshop, just to call out the README again, it's here. All the code that I've written today is, and I guess also the code that I haven't written, because I'm going to skip over it, is going to be in the README here. So if you're ever like right now working on something and you're stuck, just go to the README. The code is there, and probably in more detail than I explained it to you. And yeah, so without further ado, we're going to move on to the last section, which is layouts. Yeah, we'll transition to Jody again. Yeah.
So, all right, so we're on to our third section. I'd say the main takeaway from this workshop, if you only want to take away one, is props. This one is sort of just for aesthetics. It's stuff we haven't really covered in terms of how to make your website nicer. So feel free to just sort of watch this and just know that it exists. I don't think we'll have time for a practice, but that's okay. Oftentimes, when we do stuff that involves CSS, we just Google and we find the answer. But I'm just going to show you guys that this stuff exists so you can find it later on your own. All right, so let's move on to layout. So what is layout? Layout is using CSS to position our elements on a page. All right, so what does that mean? Let's get into it right now. All right, so if you've ever seen memes like this on like any CSS or any like computer science Facebook pages or like Reddits, and you never understood it, these are all about layout. So basically you can change CSS on elements and you can like rearrange things on your page, and you can make Pikachu look really, really scary. Yes, so that's what these memes are about. It's CSS layout. All right, so I was gonna do a demo, but we'll just jump straight into this. So basically, all right, so yeah, for the sake of time, we'll just sort of show what we have here. Here, let me start over. So most elements have a default, or actually all elements have like a default property called display, and it's going to usually be given something called block. So basically, what does this mean? When you put the CSS property on an element, it's going to look something like this, where it'll take its own line, and everything after, no matter like what you put after it, will just pop up on a new line. So this is like the default display property for most elements. Even if you haven't typed it yourself, the browser will give it this default property. So just know that this has been existing. You probably haven't used it, but it's there. So let's look into a few more like display properties. We saw like display block. Basically, you take the width and height of an element. That's how much room it takes up. And then you add a new line, and anything you put after in your code will be inserted on a new line. So that's display block. Another one you'll commonly see is inline block. So basically the width and the height of whatever element are preserved. And then instead of putting a new line automatically, things will just pop up right after each other. So if you like put images on your page, they follow this behavior. And we also have inline. Inline basically doesn't care about the width and the height. It'll just take up however much space it needs to take up. And then there's no new line, and you can see it's sort of one after the other. So this is like kind of, if it's kind of confusing, that's okay. Most of the time when people are coding CSS and they're trying to say like, oh, how do I get it one line after each other? Or like, what was the difference? I forgot. They really just Google it. So there's stuff like this, like Stack Overflow post that gives a really good description on the differences and goes a lot more in detail. But don't worry about this too much. Just know that these exist. And most of the elements you have this display block property with a few exceptions. For example, images have this inline block behavior. All right, so you might be thinking, okay, well, that was really cool. We can do everything with positioning now, but there's actually limitations to this as well. So for example, just think to yourself, like using the 3 properties I just showed you, how do you evenly space elements in a row? Like how do I put it on a page, get them evenly spaced apart? You can't really do that. You could probably think around like some workaround with margins and like calculate that, but that's really hard. And then how do we put elements in a column? Same, if you think about it, it's kind of hard. And then how do I align all blocks to the right side? So for example, on the previous slide, these are like all pushed to the left, but what if I want it pushed to the right? Because I don't know, I'm writing in Old Chinese. I have no idea. So there's limitations to this. So we're going to actually introduce one more property called display flex, and that is a concept called flex box. So flex box is going to provide all of that extra things that we wanted to do. But first, before we do that real quick, we have to talk about the CSS parent-child relationship. So not this parent-child relationship, but the CSS one. All right, so real quick, what is the parent-child relationship? So let's just say I want to recreate the card from Squid Game. It's a rectangle with triangle, circle, square inside. So of these, what is the parent and the child? Well, the parent is the element that contains other elements. So in this example, the div, which is in pink here, and it's also just a box here. Imagine there's styling, it's just on some other page. This is what we call the parent component or the parent element because it has stuff inside of it. And then the child components are the ones inside of the parent. So we have a triangle, circle, and a square. Yeah, so parent just think is the one that is the container. It holds other things. And then the child is the one that's directly inside of that, right? So kind of like an abstract concept, but it's important in how Flexbox works. All right, so with Flexbox, parent elements decide how children are positioned. All right, so we just did display block, inline, and like inline block and whatever, but we're going to use one more property called display flex. And this property lets parents control the positions of child elements. So all of the CSS I'm about to talk about right now, if you put this on a parent element, it'll determine what the children elements inside are positioned as. So put this on the parent one. All right, so a quick core concept before we get into flex. Generally, when we're positioning things like on a page, we care about like the up, down, and the left, right direction, right? Because how far up and down do we do it? How far left and right? But when we're looking at this, we're kind of like, okay, so what direction is up? What is down? Like if I turn my head, it's a little different. So how do we agree on what up, down, left, and right is? So in Flex, we're actually going to use something called the main axis and the cross axis. All right, so rather calling it up, down, left, and right, we're going to use main axis and cross axis. And main axis, as I wrote here, by default goes horizontal, and cross axis is just perpendicular, it goes vertical. And you might be thinking, well, if that's the default, how do we determine that direction? All right, so how do we determine that main is horizontal and cross is vertical? That's going to be another CSS property we add to our parent, and that is called flex direction. And this basically tells us which direction that those axes is run in. All right, so this determines the direction of the main and cross axis. If it takes on two main properties, there's a few more, but these are the main ones. Row or column. If it's row, that means our main axis runs in a row. If it's column, our main axis will run vertically in the column, and then the cross axis will be perpendicular to that. All right, and then we're going to have a property called justify content. That's going to determine the placement of elements along that main axis. And then align items will determine item placement along the cross axis. So in the default mode, justify content will move things left and right. Align items will move it up and down. And it's really just easier to show you how these work. So here are some GIFs of this. Oh, let me optimize for screen sharing so the recording gets it. Okay, so as we can see with let me move this. Okay, so with flex direction column, all of the boxes by default go in a column, and row, they go in a row. So this is just a nice animation showing that. All right, and then, we have the next property, justify content. So in this example, we're assuming that our flex direction is a row, but with justify content, we can determine how it's spaced along that row, left and right. So we got flex start, put it at the beginning. We have flex end, put everything at the end. We also have center, which is just center it, space between, and spaces it apart evenly. So that's pretty cool. We also have align items, and this does it in the same thing, but in the vertical direction. So very same, like basically same as justify content, but vertical, and it's got this cool stretch thing as well. Okay, so I was gonna tell you guys to do some practice, but we're almost out of time. So I'll just say, do this at home if you're interested. This is how I learned Flexbox. There's this really cool website called Flexbox Froggy. And all you do is you try like align frogs onto lily pads of their matching color with Flexbox. It's really fun. I would highly recommend it. And you'll actually learn it pretty well in like 15 or 20 minutes. So we'll do that later if you're interested. And some other resources from some of our hack officers that have thought of some good Flexbox resources. There's a link for that as well. But let's just think about our Netflix example, since that's what we've been working so hard to build. Here's the actual Netflix episode. If we notice, we have one major div wrapping 3 divs. And if we are thinking about how did they style that with Flexbox, on this pink parent div, they really just did display flex. The flex direction is a row, and justify content is center. It's not like all the boxes are sort of smushed to the left. And align items is also centered. They're not like pushed to the top. So they're kind of centered neatly in the middle of this outer pink div. And one more step in is we have sort of the description of the episode. We can also see that was probably made with flex as well. So display flex on the parent one, which is the div that wraps it. And then the flex direction is column. So we have one on top and one on bottom. If it was a row, they'd be sort of smushed side by side, but this is a column. And even within this top line itself, we could also have a flex as well. So it'll also be flex direction row, but this time we're gonna space between, we're gonna push apart the elements as far as we can. So that's sort of the CSS we put to those. And with just a few minutes left, I'll show you how we can turn our sort of content only Netflix app and make it the actual one. So I'm going to open something I have prepared beforehand. So let's see, I have a lot of folders. Give me 1 second. Hackschool discussion 4. Okay. So this is basically just, okay, this is basically the same app we have right now. And once I run it, so I'm using yarn start, yours would be npm start. I just have a sort of different package manager installed, but yours is just npm start. And if it loads, we'll actually see stuff. So, okay. In our components real quick, I'm gonna take out all the CSS that I added. So we can kind of see what it's supposed to look like. Oh, hold on. I get it. Okay. Okay, it's running. Okay, so actually, it's just going to show the final product because apparently it's too slow at typing. And I didn't get rid of everything first. My computer is kind of slow. Okay, well, while she's being a little slow, I'm gonna try to do my best and comment some of this out again. Okay. 1, 2. It says I have an error. It's that. Okay, so let's get rid of this. So in our episode, okay, so, all right, so I basically just added a few other CSS properties. I kind of inverted the colors. I left align stuff, added a tiny bit of padding. So those are the other CSS stuff I did, but there's no flex. But if I add a few flex and like things in, make it, oh, this thing. Ah, yes. Oh, and VS Code. Okay, so I basically added a few classes, and you can see that here. I said class name episode container. So let's just look at that one. If I add the flex properties that I mentioned before, we already see a difference. So we can already see that I did flex row. I think that's really all I did. It's just flex row. And then we already get that. And this already looks basically like what our information is. And just of the, because of some default styles, it actually looks like we don't need to do anything else, but I can add it just for the purposes of demonstrating. If we display the episode information, which is this header and then this description here in the vertical column, we'll also get this. I mean, it looks like that just because of some default behavior. But yeah, this is what our Netflix list ends up looking like. And this is just really simple CSS. I just added some flex, changed the flex direction, how it's spaced left and right, up and down, or main axis and cross axis. And then I just like changed some of the colors and spacing. But this looks basically like the kind of like the actual Netflix itself, which I think looks, oh, I don't know where it is. I think it's here. Here's the actual one. And here's ours. So this is like pretty good. And all I have to do is like some layout stuff with CSS. But yeah, all right, we're basically out of time. Oh my gosh, here's the slideshow. So thank you guys for coming. We hoped you had a fun time with us. Happy early Halloween. Hopefully you made it through midterms, and please fill out our feedback form. We really appreciate the feedback. We really do look through it and improve things from it. In next session, we have event handling in state. So basically more ways to dynamically change our components and stuff like that. So look out for that. And we'll see you guys all next week. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming. Yes.